All right. I'm gonna call the June 2nd, 2025 meeting of the
La
board.
junta de junio 2, 2025 para el Comité Financiero.
Oh, yeah, second. Start translation.
Anyone want to read?
Second.
Okay.
All right. Let's repeat it. I'm gonna go ahead and call the June 2nd, 2025 meeting of the Board Finance Subcommittee to order. It is 3:33 p.m. And we're gonna go to item 2, public comment on non-agenda and agenda items.
We probably want to establish a quorum.
All right, we'll establish quorum. I have trustee Kirby present, myself present, and President McNally is not present.
Thank you, sorry.
So with that, we'll go to public comment on non-agenda items and agenda items. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment to this committee?
No parts of it.
Any? Seeing none, then we'll go ahead and move to item 3, discussion action. 3A, discussion the facilities master plan process and bond funds. I believe I have Eric Oden presenting.
So I think, so the way that we've have this listed is that the subcommittee will discuss facilities master plan update process, key milestones, bond funds, recruitment of citizens oversight committee as particular topics.
And I just said the intent here is not to get into the details of what we'd be spending money on for facilities, but the intent is to discuss the process so we're all aware of what's going to happen as we're revisiting the consolidation. So just for folks that weren't involved in some of the earlier questions around this, we're not saying we want this or we want that. It's more about how is everyone going to be able to be engaged to have those conversations.
Yeah, so the revisions of the facilities master plan that the board approved the proposal for QKA architecture to get started on this fall will involve redoing all of our site-based meetings, at least 2 per site. And what Aaron and I, Aaron's the principal over at QKA, what we discussed was probably doing maybe 3 to maybe even a bigger community meeting at some of our 712 sites, knowing that we wanted to get some greater input for those sites. So those will start this fall. We have not hammered out a date yet. We're going to plan that over the summer, and we plan to get all of the dates scheduled, sent out to the site administrative teams to make sure that they work with their schedules, and we can fine tune that. That's how we do it.
Sorry, good.
Okay. So that we can make sure that that all works with everyone's schedule, and then we can actually send that out, post that on the website, and get those messaging sent out to the community as well. So the process will take a few months to do, because we want to make sure typically the process is we meet first with a group of stakeholders, get their input and feedback, and then there's a process that the architect will need to kind of coalesce all of that information into some initial document that we bring back as round 2. Like, here's what you had said, here's what we're proposing, what do you like, what do you not like, and then how do we want to prioritize based upon what came out of this group setting. So there'll be multiple meetings. Last time for the last master plan, we did over 100 community meetings. I imagine we'll be not quite that detailed, but it'll be above 15 total meetings in a period of about 4 months. And then we'll bring to the board the final document, I'm hoping by the beginning of the year for approval.
Yeah, and so just a reminder that these are all living documents. And so it's as we complete projects, as we have things that happen that change priorities, and those will come back.
So, and sorry, the cost estimating proposal. So that's the other part of it, is costing out those projects. So there's a cost estimating exercise that is being proposed in January to bring to the board for final approval in February, actually. So what was on the proposal of QKA. Those are just, basic markers. We can make some adjustments there, trying to speed things up as we can. But we really want to make sure that we involve as many stakeholders as we can, and I know that I'm already hearing a lot from the empowerment groups and a bunch of more responses, people who do want to be a part of it, which is great. So I imagine we're gonna, try to figure out how to really get those stakeholder meetings together and get as much involvement as we can.
So traditionally, when we talk about stakeholders, we think parents of the campus, teachers of the campus, administrators. Is there a community stakeholder group for each campus or like the surrounding neighborhood, or are there other stakeholders that we talk about, or is it traditional?
Yeah, some of it we rely on our site leaders at that site, like not only the admin team, but the parent groups to help push the message out as well to some of their community groups, whereas we don't know all of those types of groups per se, but so we do rely on kind of a group to help broaden that scope out for the rest.
I do want to, because we covered a bunch of them with CSEA as well, so include as another stakeholder group.
For the, we've been talking about a lot about how we've been doing things kind of backwards, because we haven't been able to actually get to the point of how to do things based on decisions. The pacing of this is gonna be more similar to doing things methodically and planning and not feeling rushed, or are there gonna be things in this master planning that are gonna be urgently needed to get decided? And that could drive a quicker timeline.
Things that we have been planning already, let's say, and have brought to the board as other proposals, they may be from architects or as some geotech work or something like that, that is part of a potential future project. Is basically in our existing master plan, as we talked about, as removing portables and adding capacity to the extent of which we need it to be, which some school closures and consolidations has brought that to the forefront. So I think we're in line there, but so I don't think we need to rush the process any more than we have set forth in the initial proposal that was brought from the architect. Yeah.
And if I can, because I know there've been some questions from particularly our Proctor Terrace community about the trenching study that's happened there, that's happening there. That was something that was already in need and slated to go forward. Depending on if it stayed open, it's been selected to stay open, so we have to do that project in order to do our upgrades and the other things that are planned for that site. I just wanted to clarify that because I know that there have been some concerns raised by some of the parents. They're thinking that it was being done as a preparation in case we needed to close it. It's actually to help us so we can move forward with building. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
that.
it's actually to help us prepare for the master plan, right? And we need to know what that is so that when we master plan with that group, we have all the relative data we need to make sure we make the proper plan for the site. So that for Hidden Valley as well. Sorry.
Yeah, I just didn't hear the same concerns specifically from Hidden Valley, so it's same thing there. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The scope when we're talking about revisiting the master plan for folks that are, is it everything's on the table, we're starting with a blank slate? Is it we're starting with the existing master plan and we're gonna make the tweaks associated with consolidation? What's the scope that we're starting this?
Yeah, so what we talked about with the architect was not starting from zero, because that would take a longer process. So, we're gonna start from what we have, but we're gonna present it to the group as, okay, here's the existing master plan as it exists. Here are some things that happened in our district that are gonna make some effects to that, and then kind of take it from that point and move it forward and not go backwards in any stretch. It will. Some schools like Santa Rosa High or Montgomery are going to dramatically change their master plan. Some schools won't change it very much. Maybe Lincoln might have a few tweaks or something, but it won't be nearly the same as some others. So we'll see how it plays out. But I don't plan on starting from zero. We plan on starting from a good base we have and working with the community to figure out how the effects are going to be.
Prior to the stakeholder meetings, is there going to be any educational opportunities around this is what the current master plan is? So like they're not learning, folks new to it aren't learning about it in the stakeholder meeting, but they're able to have learned about
Yeah.
it before they come.
Yeah, what we did last year, it's been a couple of years since we did it. We took the pages for that site and the principal, when they shared out the message, they included that attachment of what the master plan for the site looks like currently. And so that way people could review that and maybe see ahead of times what, if they didn't want to attend, what's in there. And so they can familiarize themselves a little bit with them. And as well as the process that's part of that master plan is in the front part, we can include that as well. So they kind of have an understanding of what and why.
Before we move the bond and citizens oversight, trustee Kirby, do you have any questions before we move to the second and third parts of this item?
Yeah, thanks for checking in. Yeah, just a couple things just to clarify for the public. I know we're talking about, the getting the community involved and enabling them to ask questions and be informed in the process. So just a reminder that, there is that 5-step community engagement plan that we typically do when we have large projects. I know, we have had to expedite some of these projects because of the tight timeline with our consolidation, but just listen to Director Oden. So if we're able to slow it down a little bit to the point where we can actually implement some of that plan, I look forward to that so that they can, so the community can be involved and provide their input, as well as the site stakeholders as well.
I would agree. Yeah, we've had a couple of tight turnarounds on some things, but I was just in the initial design, so we still plan on involving the stakeholders and the groups as part of the design of the actual classroom buildings or whatever it is we're doing. It's just that we've had to get started on some of that initial process quick to get it into DSA so that we can make the timelines on a couple things. But typically these processes do take longer, so we can involve more people even earlier in the process. This would just involve them slightly behind where we would normally do.
Perfect. And regarding the trenching studies, I know it's been brought up several times, but I've had a few people obviously reach out to me, particularly with Hidden Valley, well, both Hidden Valley and Proctor Terrace, but could you, and maybe I don't know if you know this answer, but if the trenching study comes back as inconclusive, are we still able to proceed with any projects that we want to do, or is that kind of put everything on stop or hold?
Why don't they come back with these?
I don't know that they can come back.
Yeah, I don't think they.
Either they find evidence or they do not find evidence. And then it's up to CGS.
So I think, what that's maybe referring to when Miller Pacific was talking about, it has to be definitive that it wasn't within that timeframe. Was it the last 11,000 years?
Yeah.
So that's maybe, if they can't tell the timeline, that's, I'm thinking what trustee Kirby.
Yeah, so I think that as it was stated, we are guilty until proven innocent. So we have to prove that there isn't an active or a fault that's younger than 11,000 years, a surface fault. And that's also verified by a third peer-reviewed study of his findings. So before it goes to CGS for confirmation. So we should have an answer one way or the other.
And
Okay,
it's just,
great.
and there's a certain, within 50 feet of that there's that issue, correct? So say if we found a fault, one that's less than 11,000, that's where we have to avoid.
Correct. So it depends where it depends where they find it and where they trace it, right?
Yeah.
Through the site. So there's some definite, we'll see. We're just hoping that there just isn't one, and then it's not a problem.
Exactly.
Until we have the
Okay.
study, we can't answer the questions.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, answer everything.
Okay, that's all I got for now. Thanks.
Yep.
All right, I think The next part of this, was there anything else that anyone else wanted to share around the master planning part before we move to the bond funds and oversight committee?
We did also pass out the big poster boards at each site of the master plans, and most of the sites have those
Display them.
posted in a
Okay.
fairly obvious area that we see like when we go out, so.
So for our
Another way of
on-campus
getting-
stakeholders, they can currently
Exactly,
be
another way
looking.
of trying to capture
Yeah,
people's attention
yeah.
to that.
Yeah, it's trying to draw their attention to what could or would be coming their way at their site now. It is a little dated at the moment.
already changed.
We'll be reprinting new boards and putting them out once we're finished and approved, yeah.
They can be conversation starters.
Exactly.
For sure.
Information.
That will probably be in the meeting right there.
Okay.
With that said, we'll move to the second part of the or item, which is the bond funds. I believe we had this in here intentionally just to talk about and reiterate that when we're talking about construction funds and financing, we're not talking about in the classroom funds. But if you could talk about the different kind of the big different pots, state, local, where construction projects come from and how the bond can be used to draw in more than just the bond money.
You want me to talk about it or do you want to talk?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh.
If you want me to talk about it, I will talk about it, but.
Lisa talked about it better than I will. I'll fumble the fund numbers a little bit more.
I can chime in.
But Joel.
Yeah, Joel's-
It'll be a team effort.
Yeah, Joel is the expert on our bond, on our different funds. The way that the state funding works though, and our bond funds is that we have, you know, the voters authorized roughly 400 million on the high school, the secondary district, and around 150, and I'm just rounding, around 150 million on the elementary district site. So again, that 150 goes towards elementary projects, the 400 goes towards the secondary projects. Anything that's district level, it comes as a percentage split.
24.
Yep, 76-24. Thank you. See, they need to
Not
chime
bad
in here.
idea, yeah.
So those are our local funds from our local taxpayers, and those are not issued all at once. They're issued in a series. So far, we've issued the first set. We have another set that we're getting ready to issue in this upcoming couple of months. And then there'll probably be 2 more issuances. So typically it happens over an 8 to 10 year period that those bond funds are issued. And that's because you can only issue up to a certain amount as far as the taxability, the tax rate. And you also have to be able to complete or have a plan to complete 85% of spending those funds within the first couple of years. So it's making sure that you're meeting both those timelines, which is, it's a little hard. It would be hard for us to spend $550 million all at once anyway. It just the logistics of construction. What we have done is we've also contracted with King Consulting, who is helping us to apply for state matching funds for modernization and new construction. In some cases, that doesn't mean that we're building a new campus. It has to do with for different purposes, depending if you're replacing a campus and the cost is over a certain percentage, then you get new construction funding rather than modernization funding. And we've identified, I think, $140 million, 160 million now. So went up 20 million since the last time. But I've looked at that number. So it's on a reimbursement basis and as a percentage of a project. So it could be, if we had just for example, if we had $100 million project and all of those costs within that were considered approved, so it's allowable costs and at allowable rates for the state, we can get a match of up to, it's a 60-40 split. between the state and the district, and it comes in as a reimbursement and is actually funneled into Fund 35, which is for state reimbursements for funding. So when we're talking about many of the projects that we do district-wide that are at the district level, that's where we would actually be looking that we're reimbursing ourselves in that way, that would be offsetting those costs. And then there are other funds as well, like our developer fees, which are for upgrading classrooms for students coming into the district. Or some replacement, you do upgrades of some furniture and some different things like that out of there as well.
So 3 questions. I'm gonna do one at a time because they're different topics.
Yes.
When we're thinking of the local bond funds that the voters have approved and trust us with, and I think of non-school district places where that type of funding has happened, there's often a ratio roughly, like the 101 widening had X amount of state, it was 3 state to 1 local, and therefore that tax measure was considered to have a 3-to-1, because we passed it. Same thing with SMART, a lot of those improvements. What's roughly like a good ratio for us to anticipate in the educational world? We're talking about local taxpayers putting money in order to get matching funds.
So again, that's that 60-40 split
So
and is of approved cost. So it never works out to 60-40. It's always we receive less from the state but it's still an augmentation that doesn't cost us anything in the long run. So it really either saves our taxpayers funding, money, or it helps us to accomplish more projects, considering our master plan had $1.4 billion worth of need in it, and we had $550 million available. So by augmenting that additional $160 million, we cut that number in half.
And every project we are proposing, we run through our consultant to make sure we are maximizing our matching with the state. We don't skip out on doing something that will cause that to not happen.
Well, if we're doing that well and our consultants doing that well, would we expect to be at like a local dollar with a state dollar at a 50-50 instead of a 60-40? Or what looks good?
It really depends on the project. Because there are some that we don't qualify for it on, and there are others that we do.
Yeah, when we go for state funding, we have to follow certain criteria like get DSC approval, follow all the public contracting code guidelines, so we're making sure to maximize every project we can. It's just tough to like put a dollar because only some projects are eligible for state funding, not every single project we do.
Right.
So that's why we work closely with Chief Consulting and make sure we maximize every penny we can.
And I know we're trying to ask it from the perspective of like, how would I sitting here, not in those meetings, looking at, know if we are if we're doing it well, or if something might be getting messed up and we're not getting some of that matching funds because there's something wrong with what's in the process.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics off the top of my head, but I know like after a school reaches like 25 years, you get a certain dollar amount for modernization and new construction, so that factors into how much overall money the district can get. Cause right now Eric mentioned we're at 150 million. So depending on what projects and what sites we do them at, is how we can get in line for that money.
Okay.
And this is not that we expect the public to do this, but there is an OPSC, Office of School Planning Construction dashboard where you can actually look at our applications as a district and their status and how much funding we're getting back, when that's being dispersed, all sorts of really, in-depth details on the application process itself.
Is there ever any like comparatives to how other districts are doing with what they're getting in this space? As far as matching, like do we know if we're on par?
So it's very different across the state. So you have districts that qualify for facility hardship funding or financial hardship funding or modernization or new construction. So there are all kinds of different buckets depending on the actual circumstances at the district. So that one's really, it's not an apples to apples comparison between really any two districts. There's gonna be very unique.
I have faith we're
circumstances.
doing a good job.
Yeah,
These are the meetings where I do the trust but verify conversation, so.
oh, absolutely,
The
yeah. no,
other thing that makes it difficult is once you get your application approved, you pretty much go in line underneath all the other hundreds of
Right.
applications, so.
Try to get them in quick.
The allocation board to approve you and then see if they have enough money to fund that.
It depends on when the state has passed a bond, so we were really lucky this last year, the state passed a bond, and so a lot of our reimbursement money comes from that state bond. But in times of like recession, if we're not able to get that bond passed at the state level, the new application kind of gets put. You're in line still, you don't lose your place, but you get put on hold until there are more funds available for them to keep dispersing it.
But because our local voters had approved our bonds, we were ready to have all of our projects in line.
Yes.
So when the state one got approved, we were able to actually capture that.
Correct,
A lot of our
we went
projects.
backwards, yeah, we went through INL bonds that are already projects that have been completed, and we got in line on stuff that had already been done already to get funded earlier, because when Prop 2 passed, which was for, I can't remember how many billions of dollars Prop 2 was. $1 billion anyway, that it got it, we were already in line.
But you're not, each building isn't automatically available to use that funding. Okay, each building has to qualify. And one of the big qualifiers is you haven't used any state bond funding for how many years?
Yeah. Yeah,
Decades.
you can only get it for so many times, yeah.
So if you've used it
And we
on your
haven't,
buildings,
yeah, we haven't.
you have
used
to
it.
wait till that time passes so you can apply for it again.
So we were ready.
We hadn't used any,
Yeah.
so everything was, so we started
Yeah.
getting in line now. Yeah, we hadn't got used any for a couple
No.
of decades.
Right, because we've used it in the past.
Because we
Not
hadn't
since
used.
2000, like the early 2000s, so we were available and ready on most sites to use funding, so we went. Like the Maria Korea press box, like we went through and went backwards on some of these projects, the old roofing projects, and went ahead and had King go ahead and get us in line for reimbursement funds. For what they could on older projects,
So
so we could start matching funds and extend our bond dollars.
Yeah, it's essentially for a while, there wasn't that partnership there to help the district get
Yeah.
those. To apply for those funds and to identify the projects.
And that kind of leads to the other side of the bench looking forward. We said a lot during consolidation that new buildings or new campuses are actually less expensive than retrofitting. And it was kind of a general statement that was being made. Can we go a little bit more into detail on what that means now that we're in less tense period of time?
Sure, I'll let Brian maybe speak to the reason why. Sometimes new construction is cheaper than retrofitting and what triggers the massive size.
We have to follow, I believe it's IR4 from DSA. And it was put into place so that you're not retrofitting these old buildings that are way past their lifespan, so. After you hit 50% of the replacement cost, you have to structurally upgrade the whole building to today's current code. Which is very expensive, it's almost more economical to build something new, yeah. Because you don't know what you're gonna run into once you start opening up walls or looking at foundations, so there's a lot of unknowns.
And each project also, we're bound to 20% of the project budget is supposed to go towards accessibility upgrades through the Division of State Architect. So once you add that 20% on top of structurally upgrading a building, you're really better off for the lifespan of the total building, just starting new and bringing everything up to today's code.
So we got some of this, we started getting some of these questions around the additions of TK classrooms and buildings. And some of the other things where it's like, well, why are we just building, now we're just building new buildings, why did we close the campus down type of conversation? So if we, let's walk back through that.
Yeah, so especially in the master plan, that was actually called out, right? Because with the addition of TK, which wasn't. Was only the last couple of years we started adding TK to our school districts. We don't have a lot of rooms with bathrooms on our elementary sites. We usually have one, maybe two per site, so most classrooms have or most schools have two 2Ks and 2Ks, so that gives you the need of four, so we're already behind, so if we do need to add capacity and build a permanent building to replace a portable, it's best to replace it with a room with a bathroom because that's a need and it's part of our reimbursement with the state, we can actually get more funding for that. So the goal was to provide elementary sites with not only the elimination of portable buildings, which, as you know, every single one of our elementary sites has multiple portables, and they're all well over 20 years old. To get rid of those, but to add those, if we're gonna add something, let's add something with a bathroom, because it's a need within our school.
Also, TK and K rooms are larger than traditional classrooms, so by several hundred feet. And because there's a need developmentally, that what happens in TK and K, they need more space in the different areas. And so that's another piece of it also, is we don't have the spaces in addition to the restrooms, but the actual classroom space.
Yeah, the portables that we have are all 960 square feet, that's the standard. A TK classroom is required to be 1,350 square feet, so we're short there, as well as the bathroom. So this helps solve both two problems at once.
Another requirement is drop off.
Pick up and drop off area, yeah, is required as well, so.
Request for DJing the podcast is probably having a whole second. So along that same kind of conversation theory, when we're talking about outside of the TK kinder buildings or putting new buildings on existing campuses, is the age of the campus or the age of the building that determines the access to those different funds?
As far as like state matching funds or just?
Yeah, so like instead of doing a retrofit of an out of date, is that the age of the campus or is it the age of the building?
It really depends, like, depending on the school site and the age of it, some sites have more eligibility. So like an older site might have more modernization money and less new construction, so we work closely with our consultant to see which type of funding we're eligible for in that situation.
Okay, so it can be different, but in general, the new building has better access to funds or is less expensive because of the code.
Yeah.
Yeah, the retrofitting upgrade for a building to change its use especially will be dramatically cheaper to build it new than it will be to knock out walls and upgrade these things. It's hard to change, say, a classroom pod at Lincoln and knock out all the interior walls and try to make tea cakes out of it than it is to just build new TK buildings. It's cheaper to do it that way.
Trustee Kirby, do you have any additional questions on bond funding?
No, it's a good discussion. I think just about covered everything.
I put this last one on here more as a PSA, but if you could just talk briefly about the role of the oversight committee for the bonds, and then if there's open positions or any pitch for people to join, this would be the time to do it.
It's a requirement of our bonds that we have a citizens oversight committee. And that maybe Felicia might be able to speak to the openings we have on there, and I know in our recruiting of that and what we've done to try to gain membership.
Right, actually, at this last committee meeting, we established that with our new applications for measures C and G, we have met all the categorical requirements, that there's no limit to how many members we can have, so we always welcome applications. But I know for like our bond audits and Measure INL, we had members that had termed out, so you can only serve a maximum of 7 years or 3 terms, whichever comes sooner. And so with INL, we had members that had served beyond that, and without getting an entirely new committee of 7 or 8 people, it was just a finding that we weren't able to kind of get away from. We are spending down Measure INL and journaling everything over so that once we've spent the last dollar, that committee dissolves. And so we're no longer required to have a Citizens Oversight Committee for those bonds, and it starts completely new for state and G. So as of right now, we've luckily met all of our requirements in terms of the categories we need to meet, but like I said, we're always welcoming applications. We are advertising actively in the Quest Democrat and I think in Parent Square, other resources as well, just so that the community knows that this is out there and it's another public forum that they can come and join.
It's also in our facility update every month at the top, right? It talks about the COC just to help, come join that. Trying to get more members or more involvement.
Yeah, they generally meet a few times a year, 2 to 3 times a year. And what their role is it's not to help plan out funds or anything like that. It is really it's a checks and balance to make sure that what we've spent the bond funds on is what was allowable within the measure that was passed by the voters. So that's really what it comes down to, and also to review and our annual audit. And because we have a separate audit for our bond funds from all of our other funds. And to do an annual report to the board saying yes or no, and here's the audit. So it's not a super. Yeah, it's, yeah. It wasn't somebody. I think it was Jenny, the chair was like, yeah, this isn't a sexy committee, but we want people on it because it's necessary.
Well,
Absolutely.
I used to serve on the Citizens Oversight Committee for a different funding type, and I always worded it as you read the ballot measure and you look at what money was spent on, and you say, does this actually match the ballot measure?
Mhm.
And it's an important function for the community to do that because
Absolutely.
there are places where that doesn't happen. And if you're at a place where it's all happening right, then it's a very boring committee because it's all happening right.
Right.
But if you're not there to do it, then, never.
Yeah, we do lose some members when they think they can actually have like a say in how we're spending or what projects are going forth, and they find out that they're just actually supposed to check bond language against what we're doing. We have lost a few over the years, but.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty solid.
We actually.
No, and we actually had some
active
public
movement.
comment. We actually had some public attendees this last time, so that
Yeah.
was good. Mhm.
Yeah, so some of our outreach is working better if we're getting it out there. Yeah.
I'll throw the PSA out of, it's a great place to learn how to read government budgets.
Yeah.
So hopefully we get some more applications. With that, Trustee Kirby, did you have any further questions?
No, all good.
In that case, does anyone have anything to say further on this item before we move on to item B? All right, well, thank you all for coming in.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you.
And this is clarifying and I'll spread the information.
Great, thank you.
All right. With that, we'll move on to item 3B, which is discussion item on special education funding. And Executive Director John Fisher present.
Hi, so with respect to special education funding, first off, general fund contribution. Oh, I'm sorry, we're good. General fund contribution is in the neighborhood of 70%. And special ed has not been funded solely by the federal government ever. And this is a significant issue in our district. In addition to that, there have been particular changes in our fiscal allocation model that are going to affect revenue next year. Let me give a little bit of background on that. So for approximately the last 10 years, the SELPA fiscal allocation model has been that students with a so-called severe handicap are funded at a higher rate. And that rate is in the neighborhood of $21,000 per student this year. And in effect, students that aren't in the severe handicap category get zero because of the way the allocation model works. And this is anticipated to have a significant impact on revenue for Santa Rosa City Schools. I think based on projections, a couple of years down the road, we're talking in the neighborhood of $4 million decrease. Hard to predict exactly. One thing that the Superintendent's Council did vote on was to do a phase-in for the change in the fiscal allocation model. And that is next year for the 25-26 school year. It's going to be a 50%. That is sort of 50% keeping the old model and 50% keeping the new model. So the revenue reduction for Santa Rosa City Schools, I want to say is in like 1.7, 1.8 million projected, something of that sort. So a little bit less of a hit. And then the bigger decrease is going to be in 26, 27, where again, we're expecting, and this is based on current number of special education students, well, current ADA, I should say, because the new model is going to distribute revenue just as it comes to the SELPA based on ADA. There are a few programs that are funded off the top by the SELPA. The largest dollar amount one is the DHH visually impaired, which is itinerant, which is go in the neighborhood of $4 million. And then Santa Rosa City Schools runs the DHH program at Hidden Valley. It's a regional program, so it is funded by the SELPA, and essentially Santa Rosa City Schools is operating it on behalf of the SELPA. The significance of that program is that any student in the county automatically is eligible to be in that program. There is no sort of preference to Santa Rosa City Schools. So, and
Question on that one, is our DHH program fully enrolled or does it have capacity for more students?
is it, I'm sorry,
Is it fully enrolled or does it have capacity?
based on our projections for next year, it has capacity for a few more students. I was just looking at this morning. Last year, I think there were 24 students, and this year there are 21, something of that nature. So there's a little bit of room.
Is it a program that is widely known through all the other districts in the county if they're able to send students here, or is it a program that would benefit from districts knowing it's more available or parents know it's more available?
My belief, it's pretty widely known, but that may be among the group of districts that are pretty connected with the SELPA. It's a good question about how widely it's known. And I would say again, with at least the smaller districts that are in the region and connected to SELPA, it's pretty well known. There may be some individuals out there who would benefit from that. It's a good question. Again, right now, my expectation is capacity would be for maybe 4 or 5 more students potentially. And this year of significance, our expenses were greater in that program than we anticipated for various reasons. And so we asked SELPA to make up the difference or make up the loss essentially, which they did out of low incidence funding. SELPA has a pretty large balance in low incidence funding, which they're trying to spend down. And that was one of the ways they did that. We've also increased our budget expectations for next year. So this is based on very specific factors. Some is increase in salary and benefits. In addition to that, an additional obligation is that we have to provide access to after-school programs in general for students with IEPs, and that can be a pretty significant cost in case there's a couple of students in the Hidden Valley DHH programs. in addition to this, in the past, there was so-called ERMS funding, educationally related mental health services, which as of 4 years ago, became directly funded to the districts. The other significant piece about that is it's not limited to students with IEPs at this point, and so it can be used on mental health needs for any student. Potentially, I don't have the figures on how much money that has brought in recently. Other areas, there's a preschool grant. You know the amount we're getting in the preschool grant now?
501,000.
Which is lower than the cost of the preschool program.
No, I mean, our just right preschool program.
Yeah.
It's significant. There's other areas, so with the grant, we get ABs. You get a few different preschool dollar revenues, but the one that's direct funded from the state is $500,000.
And that's a part of what we're talking about, one thing, some of the new programming at BLM.
Yes, in terms of the move of the classes to BLI, I don't anticipate any extra staffing or anything of that nature in terms of the move, but simply the classrooms move and teachers moving over there, yeah. Additional piece of revenue is, at least this year, we've have in the neighborhood of 14 students who other districts have placed with us, and on a that we've contracted with.
That's 4 higher than the last, I think we had 10 in the.
Yeah, I've looked at it. We've had some that come in and left, and I looked at the most recent list, and we had 14 on the list. Not all of those have been all year. And again, we had.
I'd be remiss to add just the one comment on that.
Yeah.
So preschool, it's early intervention, so it's a state funding that allows us to work with kids at a preschool age to help them in early intervention to possibly, I don't know what's the right word.
And so in early intervention programs are typically used to address students' disability related issues, challenges, etc., to address them before they are school age, and ideally they would not be in special education at the time in intervention.
I just to restate the kind of vision of the move to BLM, this
Yeah.
preschool focus and this conversation. My understanding from our meetings has been that we're gonna have a campus there that has this program, which is kind of what we're doing, split between Lewis
Yep.
and Steele. And we're looking to make it more by leveraging community partners, first 5, 4 Cs, community health, in order to have a campus that can start to do, that can have this as an anchor, but can start to have more and more services at the preschool level. So that then when kids are coming into our now state mandated TK level, they're ready for that environment.
True, and I think the biggest virtue from my mind of the vision for Biella is the existence of general education preschools there, so we can have significantly more opportunities for inclusion. We do currently buy seats in or have MOUs with community partners for inclusion spaces, but it's on a very limited basis, 2 here, 2 there, etc. And this would allow sort of more fluid inclusion. In addition to that, there is potential for our preschool to be fee for service down the road if there is capacity for that.
This may be a different topic.
Yeah.
Where are our conversations with first 5, 4 Cs? I mean, they have new tax money coming in for some of this. Is there a status update on that, or is that something we should agendize for after the break?
Probably something that we agendize for after the break, because there's so different funding, different partners have different funding opportunities or
Needs.
needs or hardships right now, or uncertainty based on all of the volatility across.
I'll put it on my back burner, but this is sparking.
We have engaged in conversations so far, and we've had some site visits with, Sonoma Can was one of them, North Bay Children's Center. I don't know that the details have gotten beyond that, but we're starting to look at a vision of the campus where our programs fit, where potentially our general education, partners fit, as well.
It'll be good to know how we're able to help the community leverage money we're already spending with the money they've now committing to their.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, one other, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You were on the part where districts are paying us for placements.
For fee for service.
Fee for
Yeah.
service, and we were, this was something we weren't doing before this last budget year. If I recall,
Very limited.
Very
prior
limited.
to,
Yeah.
we added it into the budget with an identification of 10 placements and a $1 million kind of goal for fee for service. And we're saying we're 14 is our peak, or, I mean, how are we towards those? 'Cause those were from the
Yeah.
fiscal sustainability conversations of the.
So we've not, as I said, we've not had 10 all year, we've gradually. We've gradually grown them over the course of the year. We've been. Trying to appropriately cost our programs, and so I don't know that we've met those projections, but I think we've had a really good start towards those. In addition to that, in the wider county community, I think we're developing an acknowledgement that we're there. We did a presentation of all our programs at SELPA, and SELPA is in August, and we are going to distribute information about our programs. That said, there has to be space available, and in some programs, we're severely impacted right now. The RISE program, for example, at the lower elementary level is severely impacted. In addition to that, I think, speaking of vision, we have a vision of a few years down the road. We're hoping to, for example, with the RISE program, which predominantly services students on the spectrum, those programs were split up in the school closure dramatically, and that's something we're hoping to address with something more, however we do it, purpose built, that we can essentially develop a showcase for our programs, and districts are going to have other options than non-public school. SCO is becoming almost not an option at this point for many districts because of the closure of their programs, and I think both the county and we want Santa Rosa City Schools, among others, to step in as I'll say a quasi-regional operator to serve smaller districts. I'll give it, we currently have students that we're serving from Windsor, Northwest, Roseland, Cotati, Roanoke Park, Bennett Valley, Rincon Valley. And we just got a couple of students from Gavinston, which is in the Sebastopol area. So again, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to continue to grow that. Again, staffing, et cetera, is always an issue because we have to reserve enough spots for Santa Rosa City Schools students as a priority. But I think we've got a good start.
If I can add to, I just looked at the FSA's, the plan, and we were expecting about 700,000 for this year, 735 for next year, and 771
So there's 70,000 for a full year.
Right,
Yeah,
it varies. but
Correct.
that's- Yeah,
I'll say our current fee for an.
Sorry, that's right, because the current cost is 100. When we get
when we're
refunded.
going somewhere else, yeah,
We're going
okay,
somewhere else.
100,
And
yeah.
our ability to provide it to other districts is actually 70.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
we're
that's
already
exactly
offering
right.
them a.
Yes, the SCO fee for 2024-25 was $104,000 per student, and
That's where the $1 million was in my head.
Yeah.
10 was gonna be,
yeah,
so
we
if they place with us instead of SCO, it's about $30,000
That's correct, and that's with our extensive support needs program. Our RISE program costs out a little bit less than that, I think 58,000. Et cetera. We also next year, we'll have West Sonoma County Union High School District is placing a student with our transition program. Which that program is full,
And I know one of our discussions in moving into this was that we were looking to properly work with districts on not counseling families to transfer here for the services, but to actually place them and they remain in-house. So how are the discussions for them to understand, for those districts to understand the proper way to go through that process?
We've had some discussions at the SELPA level. I'll say frankly, I think the bigger issue potentially is charter schools. And in certain areas that are near us, where charter schools are subtly or not so subtly explaining to parents, well, if you're in Santa Rosa City Schools, you can get more services. I think that's actually a significant problem for us, and we lose a certain population, charter schools or outside of Santa Rosa City Schools, charter schools, and then the higher need students, and we're happy to serve them, don't get me wrong. Are moving into Santa Rosa City Schools, so I can't say that there's been significant progress beyond SELPA on that, but there is discussion at the SELPA level at this point. If I wanted to focus on one area, it would be with respect to charter schools.
Okay, that's good to know, because I think we need to prioritize some of where our activities are gonna be around the charter work and.
And in fact, in terms of, we likely have a few students on inter-district transfers that were probably counseled by their own school district. But with respect to students who were in a charter school at one point, I think that number probably dwarfs the number who are on an inter-district transfer. At least that's my perception of it.
And I mean, I'll say I recognize it's, you can be uncomfortable talking about, because it's, we want to make sure we're serving all the students that need to be served, but a part of that is making sure we have the funding to properly serve all the students. That's, you know, and that's where this conversation is. It's not about not having the student where they belong.
It's not about being not willing or able to serve a student appropriately based on their needs. That's not the issue at all.
Can I kind of where we're going into the horizon is. No, this is AB 602 funding that. We were talking about direct funded. All of our AB 602 money is funded to the SELPA first. Then the SELPA receives the money and distributes it to all the districts within the SELPA through its formula, through its funding model. And the state a while ago used to fund AB 602 based on students with IEPs, the SACE numbers. However, they redid their funding model to fund all AB 602 fundings to SELPAs based on average daily attendance. However, our SELPA, when that funding model changed, our SELPA did not change, and they continued to fund our districts based on those students with IEPs. Now, starting next year is when our SELPA is going to change the funding model to fund based on ADA. So, for example, what John is referring to as the charter schools, well, those charter schools are now going to get the ADA, the funding for their ADA, not based on,
Let me see if I can restate it, as my understanding is a student that is in another district or in a charter school. It is there, and they're gonna receive their partial reimbursement from the federal and state funds, but they're gonna spend their full amount. Under one scenario, they may be counseling those students to transfer into our district because we have more robust supports, but if they do it that way, we would only receive a fraction of the funding needed to support the student. If that district or that charter school properly places that student with us, so we can provide those services and supports, then as a district, we receive 100% of the cost. And therefore, that student's getting their needs met in the environment that was best serve them, while our district is not bearing the cost and taking away from the other students.
Yes.
Is that
Exactly.
That's exactly.
that's a summary of the sensitive issue we're talking about?
It is, and historically, if you look at, and part of it has to do with application process and things like that, but charters typically have less of an identification rate for special education services as compared to comprehensive or traditional schools. And part of that is again through the application process. It is supposed to work that they accept that people enroll prior to disclosing it, whether their student has an IEP or not. And sometimes that may happen ahead of time. That may be found, and those families may be counseled to stay at their school.
Yeah, or sometimes there's the one piece of evidence I saw from a neighboring middle school charter school. There was a discussion during an IEP meeting. They didn't direct, because it's per ed code, it's illegal to counsel or encourage a parent to disenroll from a charter school. However, I think it's couched in presenting options, and perhaps, you know, it'd be a real financial burden to us if we stayed in our charter school system and why don't you just enroll in your neighborhood school, etc. Like, at least that's my perception of how the conversation goes. Now, what recourse do we have against that?
That was actually going to be my next question, with the caveat of, we don't need to answer today if it's something that we're researching that's more complex, but what is the recourse?
Well, I know the remedy, if a charter school per ed code, councils are encouraged the parent to disenroll, is to report that to their authorizer. I don't know that that's necessarily particularly effective, because the authorizers typically authorizes the charter and derives revenue
From the organization.
from the charter. My hope would be this is a county or self-wide discussion with folks, and that said, in the SELPA fiscal allocation or the fiscal work group last year, the former director, whom Lisa knows, who said that the district they were representing near us, absolutely the charter schools.
Have done that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
no-
there's widespread belief it's happening. I think my question is, what's the process we do to move it from belief and anecdotal conversations to legitimate investigation and resolution?
Sure, I mean, interesting question. One could say in theory, there should be the same incidence of various disabilities in a charter school, except because it's the application process, perhaps individuals are less likely to apply if they have a student with a more severe need.
I'm just gonna anecdotally challenge that, since we're all anecdotal in this conversation.
Sure.
In that, I think there's a lot of specialized curriculum and focuses within charters in general that actually meet the needs of students with disabilities, so.
And that's been my experience, because my other gig at Sonoma County SELPA was Sonoma County Charter SELPA, and the charters with which we worked, and it's exclusively charter schools, found very, very, very creative ways to work with students with disabilities in different ways. From Waldorf schools to et cetera. That said, those schools, when faced with a very high needs student, it may be more difficult for those to work with them.
For purposes of the agenda, are you able to stay and join us for the next conversation on charter funding?
Sure, I'm okay.
I want to move this conversation to, we had received a comparative study, and there were like some notable things around our contract services that apply to special ed funding.
Yeah.
Before I do that, I want to recognize that I've asked 35 minutes of questions. So Trustee Kirby, do you have questions across this conversation of special ed that we've had that you'd like to raise?
Hey, thanks. Yeah. And just listen, I just want to clarify, I guess, or kind of ask a question. So With the change in the funding model that was discussed, that's going to happen next year from the way I was hearing it, from the more IEP to the ADA, are we anticipating that it may increase our costs, or is there going to be, I guess, growing pains in the transition from one model to the other?
Absolutely. I don't know that it increases our cost, but it significantly decreases our revenue. And ballparking 2 years from now, $4 million decrease in revenue, and we've had next year, I wanted to say it's 1.4, 1.5,
I
something
think
like.
it was closer to 1.8, 1.7, 1.8, somewhere in there for
Right,
next year
and then-
estimate.
26, 27, $4 million decrease in revenue, which is a. Gosh, I want to say that's a 25-30% decrease in in special education revenue. That's off the top of my head, but I think that's about right.
It's substantial, and those are in those numbers were updated. I think it's second interim was when we included that, because that's when they'd done the vote, because we weren't sure what that was going to look like. There were 3 options for the SELPA to choose from, or well, 3 that they considered. So that significantly changed the outlook for us fiscally, and definitely worsened at the second interim, and will be reflected as we move through budget within the third interim.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was that, had we included that in our project. So thanks for answering that ahead of time. Yeah, okay. I had just going back about the RISE program. I know you talked about it being very impacted by the closures, and that's I think we had a pretty robust program there at Brook Hill.
Yeah.
Did you have the numbers on that? I couldn't remember how many students we had over there, and is there room for them? Where are we creating room for them, I guess?
Oh, sure. So those classes were all moved to other sites. And there's a couple of classes moving to Proctor. There's a class moving to, I think a couple classes moving to Lehman. We were lucky enough to find a room at Charter School for the Arts for a RISE program. So all those teachers are moving to other sites. The difficulty wasn't that the students were that we're not able to serve the students, is that Burbank was nice. I'm sorry, not Burbank. Brook Hill was nice because we had the grade span. A student could stay at Brook Hill from TKK all the way up through 6th grade. And now we have singleton classes and 2 classes here and there. So it's in addition to that, it decreases the opportunities for teachers to collaborate and so forth. So absolutely not ideal. While I'm not in favor of having essentially a special education school, it makes sense at the same time to have at elementary school level to have a grade span of classes. And again, particularly for collaborative opportunities, and so that parents aren't moving their students from one school to the next school to the next school as the student ages. So again, my hope or our vision down the road is to be able to concentrate a little bit so we can have a great span of classes. But all the students at Brook Hill are being served in RISE classes for next year. The classrooms or the classes have been dispersed though.
Okay. All right. That's all I got. Thank you.
On the RISE, I think in my brain, I know there's a significant policy movement in the state for years to make services related to special needs, whether it's adults or students, in a place where least restrictive, most access to being in general education, or in the adult world, out in the workplace, not in necessarily a designated center. Is what you're articulating is it's not about having multiples of the same class grade level, It's about having the full track of the grade level on one campus.
Yeah,
Oh.
exactly. And then there's also efficiency issues in terms of staffing, if we're having more inclusion opportunities for students to be able to share paraeducators and things of that sort. There's definitely advantage in terms of efficiency. Again, I'm not necessarily a fan of having 12 special education classes on one campus.
But if it means that they could, if we have 6 on one campus, but it means that they're going from TK all the way up through 6th grade.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So and that the obvious one to address is the move from Biella, which had 5 classes, to Monroe, which has, I believe, 6 classes of extensive support needs. Now, those extensive support needs at each grade level, they are different. There's higher level and higher need ones within those classes. So it is a large concentration of classes, but there are advantages in addition to being able to travel up the grade span. There is room for some student movement as appropriate between classes.
Any other questions for Steve Kirby before we move to the comparative? We'll go with mute being no. So we received a comparative study. I don't think there's any news. Also was highlighted in the special ed study in January. But it highlighted that we had at least a digit or 2 difference from comparable districts in our contract services. And in that conversation, I think it's part of what spurred this agenda item. It's kind of identified that transport and contractors related to this was a part of why that number was so different from other comparable districts. And I know we've talked about it, but we're in June now, we received the study in January. Like, where are we at in the progress in addressing those kind of that financial punch list
Sure.
with the contract services and transport being?
Can I ask a clarifying question? When you say transport, you mean because we are part of a JPA, so our special education transport costs show up in our 5,000s, whereas a district that is not part of a JPA would have like a 2,000 though, because they're direct employees.
Well, that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't clear at the last meeting.
Yeah, I was thinking so.
That is why you're gonna see a different, that is one of the factors as to why our contracts look higher compared to other districts, is because we contract as part of the JPA.
And so
So
the other
that's a
question there is
portion
is that actually, that we know with the contractors around instructional aids that we're actually paying more. So with the conversation around transport, I think that it's the same question. I'm not sure the answer to it.
So that one is a different issue.
Okay.
It's not that the cost of having belonging to the JPA is more than what it would be to operate our own. It's likely actually less because of all of the infrastructure and overhead that we would have to create. But the or equivalent, very similar, it's more about the identification of transportation in an IEP.
Yep.
Because it's supposed to be related to their disability. Do they need transportation because of their disability versus do they need transportation because they have to get to school? 2 very different things.
So in that part of the transportation issue of the identification IEP, and then the discussion around the cost of services for aides, I think is what I'd like an update on.
Yeah, and with respect to transportation, there are certain cases where transportation is virtually automatic. That is, if a student requires a placement services that is not at their home school, then transportation is I'm gonna say basically automatic of some sort or another. And what is owed, even though it's typically door to door, is transportation from the home school, the school of residence, to the other school. Typically, it's pickups. Then there are a small handful of individuals who, because of their disability, would require transportation, but it's highly unusual. So what we've started to do on that end is trying to audit our IEPs, catch when the school of residence all of a sudden meets the school of attendance. That is, for example, if there's a student in a RISE program who's school and they were at Brook Hill and they are now at Proctor Terrace, say, and Proctor Terrace was their home school before, we would have owed them transportation going to Brook Hill, but no longer at Proctor Terrace. So I think we as a system need to do a better job of, when a student has transportation, evaluate every time whether that is justified by the IEP. Now, if the parent refuses to sign off on that, well, we can have an issue, but for the most part, I don't think we've had trouble with that, but we need to take it out of the IEP when it's not appropriate.
So for that, you say we need to do better. Are we doing better?
I would say we're doing better in our programs. That is because we have program managers' eyes on it. Where I'm less certain about is IEP teams who are kicking transportation. They may not understand what the proper standard for providing transportation is. Just as a side issue, we found that issue with extended school year. Where we had 800 plus students who had in the IEP eligible for extended school year, which is way overstating the amount who probably should be qualifying. So I think we need to do additional training at the with respect to case managers and also do some more significant audits of our IEPs to see if we notice trends. My experience as case managers, certainly generous folk, will in some cases provide check off transportation for parent convenience, which is absolutely not a criterion for that.
And I can imagine in some of those meetings.
Yeah, exactly, and particularly when you're trying to remove it because there's an expectation, and my hope is that with appropriate training from preschool case managers and so forth and lower elementary on, if we can get to a bit more manageable level.
Trustee Kirby, any questions on the transportation?
I guess, well, my only question was, I heard, so summer programs, do we do any or year-round program? Are we required to do for IEPs and special ed? Do we do year-round? I don't even know the answer to that.
I can absolutely speak to that. So in the special education world, there's something called extended school year. This is different from summer school, and that's an educational piece that we need to work with our case managers about. Extended school year has pretty strict criteria for when a student qualifies for that, and without getting too far into the weeds, it's if a student is going to regress without the ability to recoup in the fall. Virtually every student in school on summer break regresses.
Those days, that like population wide?
Yeah, it is population wide, but with certain higher needs student, it's expected that they, it's not, Trustee Kirby, it's not quite year round, but they need additional regular extended school year. So we at Santa Rosa City Schools do run an extended school year program. It's typically 2/3 of a day, and we're running at a couple sites at Ridgeway and Steel Lane this year. That said, when we looked at IEPs, this came out of the SPED study, and then I've run some reports on this. We had in a neighborhood of 810 students who were indicated who had extended school year marked off in their IEPs. The expected rate for extended school year is in the neighborhood of 10%, which in our district would be more like 300-ish students or something like that. Typically, students who are in an extensive support needs program will qualify for extended school years and a few others. I think in many cases, IEP teams think, sure, it would be good for the student to have summer school, extended school year, etc. So we did a significant audit of our IEPs and requested that case managers look at these and hold amendments to remove extended school years if it was determined that it was inappropriate. for it, and as an ongoing process and education for our case managers, I think we're gonna make good progress on this. San Francisco Unified had a good kind of worksheet criterion, which we distributed. In addition to that, the SELPA has a very specific extended school year worksheet, which we need all IEP teams to use. Again, I think sometimes IEP teams can be quite generous. They see the family, the student could use summer school, et cetera, but does not meet the legal standard for that. So I think we've made some good progress even in this semester. And I anticipate again able to do better on that. I want to say one thing though. It is perfectly appropriate for a student with an IEP to go to regular summer school. And I've had, hopefully I'm not bird walking too much on this, but I've had some discussions with Dr. Reimer about potentially having some ed specialists do summer school, which would be voluntary, could be for credit recovery, it could be for reading remediation, et cetera. We don't have that. Many other school districts have a summer school appropriate for students with IEPs. I think if that came into existence, there would be less pressure to put these students in extensive school year. And I think that should be available. So hopefully let me get my years right, 26 or the summer of 26, we can start to develop some summer school voluntary programs to meet those students' needs. Again, that would be distinct or different from extended school year.
And that would align with the least restrictive environment, thinking
100%.
of that all students are general education students first.
Sure.
So they are entitled to that base level, and then anything that is special.
Yeah,
services
exactly.
Would be on top of, and so that's been a big shift in mindset and systems.
That's a great way of looking at it, because a student with an IEP should be able to access summer school as opposed to extended school year. And I don't know that some students with IEPs are really able to access regular summer school at this point. So that's going to be an area, or students with 504s for that matter. I think that's an area to work on.
So.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Go ahead, trustee Kirby. I want to try and wrap this conversation up in the next 7 minutes. My intent is then to move us to the charter discussion, and we're going to push item D until we have a full committee. So that should give us the time to fully have a charter conversation. Trustee Kirby, go ahead with the next question.
No, that's it. Go ahead with the charter stuff. That's it.
Okay.
Before we go to charter, this is gonna be a generic question. So, within the special ed study back in January, when we received it, what other priorities have we made advancements on, or have we run into barriers on as far as some of those cost savings that were in there?
All right, so I think there's been some advancement on speech students, caseloads. We have very few overages at this point. We've had a number of in the neighborhood of 150 exits. I don't know how that compares to prior years, so I can't really say if that's normal or good or bad. There have been trainings in that area, and how would I put it? We found some speech language pathologists who are very on board, not with exiting students, but with students' needs being met, not necessarily by a speech language pathologist. If I can give one example, there's an area of speech language pathology that is called pragmatics, which is essentially social communication, social skills. And frequently there are extensive support needs students who have speech services from DK all the way up through age 22, and it's perhaps those needs can be met by the teacher in the classroom in an embedded model in the classroom with maybe some consult for an SLP rather than having them on the caseload. I think that's a good model, and it's something that's pretty prevalent in preschool, and we're trying to build at the elementary school level as opposed to having a pull-out service for a student and so forth. So the more that can be met in the regular classroom or with the special ed teacher, the better. So I think we've made some progress on that. With respect to, I mentioned extended school year, then contract dates. That's an interesting question. So we believe that one of the causes of our reliance on contract aides is the inability to hire district aides in those positions. And it's market forces. It's simply market forces. We're not, I believe we're not paying enough in most cases. We've had some talks. But we're hoping to be able to make some progress in that area. But it's difficult. We have a lot of jobs posted and we're not able to fill them right now. Then the other thing we did, we started to look at vendors beyond our typical vendors to see if we could get some better rates, and we've had some success with that. So we're still using contract aides, but we think we're gonna be able to hire some instructional aides at a little bit lower cost than we've had in the past, so that's a positive. But long term, I would love every instructional aid position to be filled by a San Jose City Schools employee. Two parts where we've had success in that area, transition program is almost exclusively district aides.
Oh, great.
And preschool is almost exclusively district aides. I'm not certain of the magic that they're doing. I'll credit Lloyd Clark, our program manager in charge of transition, Caitlin Pinnell in charge of preschool. It may also be that those are populations that folks like to work with better. I'm not sure exactly, but we've had some success in that area. Where we've had difficulty in hiring is in extensive support needs and in RISE program and SET program. Basically the K through 12 area.
Any further questions on special education, trustee Kirby?
I wanted to raise one. Can I raise one thing? Potentially?
None for me.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely.
So it had been, because we're in June, it had been, this had came up at the last time I was here a while back about the possibility of leaving, forming our own SELPA.
Right.
And June 30 is our magic date for, as of now, the moratorium ends in, I believe, as of July 1, 2026. And not sure if it's fiscally appropriate to do so or not. I took a look at the prior study on it, which was 3 years ago. And the difference in the prior study, 23, yeah, the difference in the prior study was it was based on the prior SELPA fiscal allocation model.
Right.
So the math may have changed, but I'm sort of wanted to raise this question. Just because we have a June 30th date to do
We
it.
need to understand, we understand the question. My understanding is the June 30th date is just to send a notice.
Correct.
But an
That is correct.
actual analysis for which we would be able to look at the new funding formula can be done after we send a notice. When will we need that done in a final decision now?
I don't know what the timeline is for SELPA other than us sending the notice now, but we would need to also. Because we are under that 15,000 mark in our enrollment, we would need to find another district.
Partners or the enrollment growth and office.
Exactly.
So we're pretty close and very confident because it includes all our charters, right?
It does include our charters, including our independent charter, because they are considered a state of the district.
And it's not. Another potential independent charter needs to come to us and include that as well. Because of time and the fact we've talked this before, I feel like we've had the general direction on the special ed of we need to make sure we're getting the money we need. And so I guess my question is there any reason we wouldn't send the notice and do the analysis?
I don't think, we were actually having this conversation earlier. I think we should probably send the notice. Where we got into the questions would be, okay, what does that impact anything with the DHH direct funded program off of the SELPA? There are interagency agreements or SELPA agreements you can do. It's just a little more complicated with those off the top things to see if it makes sense. But this would, if we send the letter, it gives us the time to figure that out.
Yeah.
And I feel like those are the things that we need to including that conversation, because it's the proper and appropriate reaction to changing the formula, because we're receiving less funds and we still have a concentration of students that needs that. we
Right,
need.
yeah, we still need to service our students.
Yeah.
And with change in the fiscal allocation model, the calculus shifts somewhat. Basically is what it comes down to we would be penalized less at least if we were to leave the self off, but again, not complete. I'm not clear as to what all the ramifications of it would be, but if we need to submit a letter that's seems appropriate, it's hedging our bets in a sense. Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna give us a 2-minute recess right here, so I can send him downstairs. And then we'll reconvene on the charter school, at 5:05. And.
Okay.
Again, and get back from our recess here at 5:05. Trustee Kirby, are you present?
Trustee Kirby, can you hear us? It's not there.
We just stepped away. Well, that's okay. We'll go ahead
No,
and.
sorry, I'm here. Sorry.
All right.
Forever. Alright, so we're gonna move to item 3C. Item 3D is gonna be continued to a future agenda when we have a full committee. So we'll be able to use the full remaining time on this discussion. We're receiving funding on independent charter funding. We're receiving information on it. I think that part of that is that we're setting up a conversation to understand it. So it's not just receiving the information, but also the broader structure of how dependent charters fit into, because we're also managing them, not just authorizing them. So with that, we have Lisa August presenting.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I will, in a minute, I'll hand it over to Joel to talk about a little bit of this as well. Should I close that and just take a picture. Essentially, our dependent charters are that they share the same board, and there are varying degrees of dependent and independent. Ours are pretty clear. It's same board, dependent, all of their financials, all of their reporting, everything, all of their support is done here through our district office. And then the independent charter has its own board and is authorized by our current board. The oversight rules are the same regardless, which means that we are responsible for verifying the fiscal information as well as other information credentials, assignment monitoring, facilities inspections, lease visits, all of the different pieces. There's 16 elements in a charter petition. We're responsible for verifying those, essentially, whether it's dependent or independent. So just wanted to kind of talk about that piece. For an independent charter, we are limited as far as what we are charging, or we are on both sides, but for oversight, which is just that review, the monitoring, it is the actual cost of the oversight or 1%, whichever is less. Or if we provide substantially free facilities, then that fee could be 3%. So for Kid Street Charter, for example, it's 1% of their LCFF revenues. So for Kid Street Charter, that's our charge is 1% of their LCFF revenues. Typically, the cost for oversight don't actually cover the fees for oversight don't typically actually cover the costs of oversight. And so for dependent charters, it's different. We still have those same rules as far as the oversight fees, but there are other things that our charters, should be paying their fair share or their actual percentage of costs for as well, such as the administration. So that includes superintendent, ed services, business. I think Joel actually created an overview document. Do you want to walk us through some of that, Joel? So this is we put it into an administrative regulation kind of layout. And ours historically hasn't been clearly delineated exactly what we charge for, how and why. It aligns very closely as Joel's been looking through it with this regulation, which this is modeled after Vacaville, I think. So, do you wanna take a
Yeah, I
step?
can speak on this, so. We have past practice, we've been overseeing the charter schools and providing these services. Administrative services, oversight and then facilities. And since I took over the role I'm currently in, the charter administrative oversight and rental facilities and so forth have continued with being updated when the charter school size changes and reallocated proportionally. For example, charter schools at CCLA went added all the way up through 8th grade. And then so that's really what's been going on. Then the other items that have been implemented as well have been through some fiscal stabilization plans saying, okay, well, we want to use some of the charter equity and transfer some of that, but that's really what's been continuing. Lisa now has put an effort into more defining and updating charter school oversight relationships, and that's where this document has come through, and it is, a 15% administrative fee, and it's in a 3% total revenues, and then a 1% over fee and rent free facilities at 2%, so that would be total about 21%.
Scroll
Yeah,
up and just stop at the
I'm sorry.
administrative.
Yeah, and these are the
Yeah.
things that we have to kind of go through and
Let's
say,
walk
okay,
through
what,
each of these.
yeah, and this is in draft right now. Actually, Joel and I haven't gotten to go through the list, say, okay, what is a direct charge versus what is something that's included from the district side. So this is a draft that we're still working through on this list. So educational.
As we're doing it, you just identify, because I know our past practice has been somewhat opaque,
Yeah.
and so if you can identify where it is, where you're like, this is in line with what we've seen happening in the past versus we need to provide structure here, and this is what we're thinking
I
of.
would say it's been more of a, oh yeah, here's some of the things that are charged, utilities are charged there directly, for the most part, although I think where we have a shared facility, it's not. So there have been some things there that.
there was
not
more,
real
so
clear.
it was a little more defined, so in the current budget, it's specifically for rent, insurance, phone, utilities, and then some transfers, direct cost transfers. So, and what's an appropriate charge? In doing the research, well, there's a 15% administrative service. There's other models that follow this 15%, like for example, in federal revenues, we're allowed to charge a 15% administrative and indirect cost. And when I reviewed the current charges, they're right in line with this. I mean, they pretty much are these percentages, but there was no one here to pass on that information to me. There was no prior documents that were available. I searched high and low. So until, I had a conversation with Lisa, there was really continued past, and now we've really worked on this document. And I think this would benefit
Well, this gives a way
something
for.
again, draft.
Yeah.
Very draft. There is precedence of other districts following this. It falls in line with, so I think that's where, but it is close to really close to what our current practice is about.
Yeah, so one of the things where some things are highlighted here, like workers' compensation is actually on payroll, so that's probably not one that should be those were just that Joel and I hadn't gotten to connect. We were trying to come up, we wanted to make sure that we had the list of all of the things that are costs of operation. And then one of the areas that we've been talking about in here as well is it ties straight into our last conversation about special education. Because right now it's some positions are charged, some aren't, as people shift to different locations that's maybe not updated. So those are some areas that we have an opportunity to better define. And as those AB $602 that we were talking about come directly into the district, and these schools are considered schools of the district, we have a couple of options. We can either pass through based on ADA their share of the AB $602, and then hire their staff directly through there, and then cover the contribution, portion back of contribution or administrative costs for special education, things that are district wide. Or we can retain all of the AB $602, have all of the staff reported under the general fund rather than the charter funds, and then charge back only the percentage of contribution based on an ADA basis. So there's a couple of different ways that we can look at that. And I think the second one actually is a clearer, easier way to be able to identify that. It provides more transparency and making sure that really all of our schools are treated the same, whether they're a charter, a dependent charter, or one of our comprehensive traditional schools, that they receive those special education services and costs in that same manner. Similar to the way that the SELPA funding model was changed based on the way that the state funding model was changed. We would be looking at that same kind of scenario.
And compared to current practice, how would that, is there a big change, or I think just the dollars going to the schools from current practice, or does that result in codifying kind of what we were doing, but making it transparent?
It's kind of a little in between. So it wasn't very standardized. I think that there were some things that were standard across the board, but others that really weren't. I don't know how to.
Yeah, I think it does,
for
I
an
think it
example.
does maybe have something to do with the old funding model, because we were attempting to direct charge the like SDC teachers, RSP teachers that were located at that site serving those students. But then we would have, and then we would, there were portions of psychologists and speech therapists, but that's a lot of annual upkeep, making sure that all the position control and funding is appropriate. We found sometimes a year into it, when we're reviewing with the principal, their budget is saying, wait, that person's not at our school site. So, I think now with we've had some conversations with the new funding model, New Horizon. There are, like you said, there's some other areas we could look at that. I think we'll evolve this. I would be remiss to say one thing. There's another, and I mentioned, what's the things that have affected the charter. I mean, the charter charges up to this point. There's another one that has affected the charter charges, and it was also in the AR, the model that we gave, and Vacaville added it in their language as well, which is the district may be determined to charge less in any given fiscal year when the dependent charter's budget does not allow for the full amount to be directly charged for oversight and administrative services. That also, and I think that they added that in there because that is another thing that's happened to us over the past years, where when we're closing out the books, they just don't have the funds to pay for those charges, because it gets a little bit out, and also in the budget advisory committee meeting, we reviewed those charters as well, and it's something of why we also thought, okay, well, now that there's more equity, let's return that due to some of the prior lack of charges. So that's something that does and can happen with charter schools in any particular year.
And this may be further down there, but so for instance, like CCLA is a Title I charter, so they get their Title I funds. Is this same percentage what gets applied to those funds coming in, or is there, so I know there's a big adjustment there.
Yeah, I know that's, so they are, and I'll scroll back up here to the top where it talks about A dependent charter is funded indirectly, which
Mhm.
means that the funds actually come to the district.
Right.
And then we allocate those out. And so I think
Yeah,
that,
the federal funding, so charter schools. They're an LEA, state LEA, and they are recognized for LCFF and different other state fundings. But for federal dollars, federal recognize them as. What is the right word? Indirect charge, so the district gets all their federal revenues. And then we pass that through to CCI, like, for example. I think we're talking about like, and. Other charter schools could also take those federal dollars, so it's kind of separate from this, it's in a separate account, it's restricted funding. But in that federal dollar, we are allowed to use an overall 15% administrative for all of our federal dollars. And then we at a district leverage, and then we send it to the school sites through school allocations. I don't know if that.
It makes, so this, what we're looking at here is more proposed for how we're handling state funding and.
Yeah,
federal.
it's more state,
So we can
it's
talk
more
about that.
state, LCFF and other state funding.
So
It
then
is-
this is about the
Yeah,
unrestricted.
unrestricted. So within this, my one question then comes to, because it looks like we're charging the 3% that we would charge a independent charter if we were giving them essentially free rent.
Right,
and
so
then
I
we're
think
charging
3% is kind of to
15%.
cover the
Two
3%.
different things.
But the 15% has facilities and stuff.
Facilities maintenance is what it
Okay.
should be, so that's
Yeah.
what I just added the maintenance, because that was, as we were talking about categories, because there's a facilities department
Okay.
that is doing the deferred maintenance, that, you know, they're managing all of the
I
stuff.
wanna make,
that
I mean,
happens
it
there.
should be a fair policy to make sure we're getting properly recognized for the management the district has. At the same time, we wouldn't want our dependent charters to be disadvantaged against what an independent charter would get.
Absolutely, what, something that we haven't been charging directly would be, say, for us in our general fund, we are required to spend 3% on facilities maintenance. On that deferred maintenance, resource. And our dependent charters aren't contributing to that right now. They may be paying for their facilities rent, but they're not doing that 3% or any of that, so this captures that piece of it.
And they have access to, was the school dude, they could put in a work ticket for the maintenance. request.
Yeah,
And-
that's not charged out, so
Yeah, I'm
it's
not
just
trying to.
no, it's just a clearer way to say, okay, here are things that really haven't been captured clearly in the past, and this is just saying very clearly, okay, no, we haven't given you a line item for each of these things, but these are all the things that the district is doing for the charter without the charter having to pay line item costs for.
I got many more questions with trustee Kirby. Before we have them scroll down to the special ed section.
Yeah, in the special ed section, I think that we've had that different discussion compared to what we.
Is there anything
pulled from the
below
other.
special ed on the document?
No, I'm following along. It's I'm good so far. Thanks.
Okay, let's go into the other parts of it in the last minute.
Yeah. So the special ed part here, this is the piece that we probably wanna reword based on what we actually want to do with it. This is, I think, pulled from what Vacaville was doing. So that's the piece that we were just talking about that we'd like to maybe evaluate and do a little
I
different.
guess one of my concerns for the dependent charters, and it goes two ways. They're. Cause it basically get their own LCFF and all, but they end up with one student with an abnormal placement cost. It could, just because they're inherently smaller, could severely impact their.
Which is why we were talking about not doing it in that way, where, I mean, this is that they would need to do that.
So let's talk about what we're thinking of.
Yeah, so what we're thinking of is that rather than passing on any of those AB 602 dollars. We keep it at the district level for providing all of the services. We provide the services at the site or at another site, depending on what we have available and what works for those students. And when we're looking at a contribution, at the contribution of what the overall costs are, if we divide that contribution up over ADA, not over the cost of actual special education ADA, then that does it as a fair proportion of those, of the overall special education costs.
I mean, that's kind of interesting. Over the years, it would probably balance out to be the best model. I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's, that gets us away from the discouragement of charters taking special education students and considering that, you know, it gets away from them needing to counsel them back to the district for services, because it's just a student, as far as special education, they're a student of the district, regardless of whether they're at one of our dependent charters or at one of our traditional school sites. It works the same way.
And I'm just thinking, because as we're thinking about how do you have more students' needs met even prior to being an IEP,
Mhm.
because there are dependent charters, is there something that cost, you know, as we're talking about these finance issues, is there something that we can do around admissions where we can have us realize there's a special education student or needs around it that may not actually get into an IEP if they were actually the right curriculum or the right challenging environment, and create a path where placements could be made outside of charter lotteries. Like, so, like a student in one charter currently, there's a realization that they have a need for a different charters or something else's. I'm just trying to see if there's a way that we can place
That I
students so they get their
don't
needs
know.
met.
We'd have to look at the way that our charter petitions are written and then determine, you know, we'd have to find out from legal counsel, we need to get some guidance on whether that can be a consideration or not.
Well, I'm wondering if there's something about our overall special ed strategy where,
Yeah,
That's interesting. I mean, it's basically if there's a district MTSS system where you can have interventions prior to qualification for an IEP. The charter schools have access, a student who enrolls in the charter school can't be denied, but they have access to that, so. They could have appropriate interventions before qualifying for special education.
that's kind of the question I'm asking, because we do a lot of our unique curriculum development that meets different needs.
Yeah,
Is
right.
happening right now
Yeah.
behind the charters, and is there a way where we could actually save money for the district by creating a pathway there?
Oh, that's, okay, that is where students whose needs could be particularly met by the charter school in that direction. That's interesting.
yeah, I think that's something we'll need to get advice
Oh, yeah.
from legal counsel on.
I mean, I'm sure, but.
Yeah.
But I think because it's this
Question.
it's a situation, because.
really interesting, yeah, I like that.
Because it's, how would I put it? It's a really good example of meeting students where they are.
Right.
And just because you have this arbitrary charter versus district school distinction of trying to get that student, whether they have an IEP or not.
And just to play devil's advocate on that for a moment, if we do that, then because there are no boundaries for charters, that then becomes a potential magnet for outside of district to come to the charters to receive special ed services.
So let's look at it.
So, you know, as.
I mean, no, I understand that,
Yeah.
like, that's why we need to look at it,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So I mean, I think those are just all of the pieces that
Very
we'll need to evaluate.
And that's what I've always heard people talk about charters. This is just the best fit for a
Right.
student.
Yeah, for sure. And at least one of our charters, and I suspect. Parents, when they feel their student is a bit of a square peg in a round, I'm speaking charter school for the arts, for example, which is
Yeah.
very different.
Or accelerated
Educational
charter
or
or
accelerated.
programs, yeah.
Hey, this is gonna work for my student because they're able to meet their unique needs in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
So I mean. We have 3 minutes left of the meeting. I always want to honor our meeting
Yeah.
time. I think this is a great start.
Mhm.
What I'd actually like to do is have this go into our next agenda if you guys have had time
Yeah.
to work on it over the summer.
Mhm.
And pick up with this conversation at our next meeting. That works for everyone. Trustee Kirby, do you have anything to add before
So,
we?
yeah,
adjourn summer?
just real quick, looking at that, like, for example, that very last paragraph there, where we talk about along with dependent charter input, are they aware, or are charters aware that this may be coming, and have they already provided some input on this?
Let me answer that one. So I think a lot of this was template language taken from other districts, and we're the first stop on the process you're
Yes.
asking about. So we're receiving it in a public manner so people know this is coming, and then Superintendent August and team will be heading on to the charter circuit.
Okay,
If you don't mind me.
Yeah, no,
Interpreting what my
I would
understanding
say,
is.
yeah, as I'm looking at this, these are template. And we're kind of updating them to be based on what we think is doable
I
going
mean,
forward and appropriate. I don't know, like this, we don't necessarily have that. I think this is template language from another.
Right,
Yeah, I think it's kind of a model that would allow for. You know, how we were talking about the ADA, that's a simple thing, this allows for
Mhm.
a little more charters to have, say, try to get the least cost back, like, oh, it's. Less expensive for us to fund this as opposed to any model, or this is kind of that, when I look at this, I think of now.
Well, I want to commend you for
More diplomatic.
taking this on. From several of our stakeholder groups, this is an important question of whether they're at the charter or not at the charter side of it. There's this outstanding question of how and why are things funded? And so taking this initiative on to actually put into an AR, getting feedback, starting this route so that we can actually answer that question is huge and really important. So
And
yeah,
thank you. And I want to definitely, say kudos and a huge thanks to the team. Especially Joel and John, I know have talked through a lot of stuff on the special ed side of the things we've been talking about today. But Joel really went out there and said, okay, what is a clear way to do this and found some examples. So
We can
really
talk about
appreciate
that
it.
in the
Yeah, we
five
can talk.
minutes.
Yeah,
so I think what would be great is, and I know it's summer, that we're asking to do it for our next meeting. But our next meeting won't be in July, it'll be August we have to discuss that actually, but it will definitely not be before August. But it'd be great if this would come back in after you get some of that stakeholder input and some of the revisions. But before it's fully baked. So, yeah.
all right.
Anything left?
The approval of minutes.
So Mark officially a member at that meeting.
Yes.
His location
yes,
is posted.
I was online.
Okay. Perfect, then we'll move to approval of the minutes. Trustee Kirby, do you have a motion?
I motion that we approve the minutes from the May, was it 5th meeting?
Second. All in favor? Aye,
Aye.
that passes unanimously. Now that will adjourn for the summer at 5:31 PM. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.